Today we're going to get started. We're going to talk all about the basics of raising pigs. So if you're new to raising pigs, this will be a good primer to let you know about all the things you got to watch out for and look into. One thing that I will say, we can't cover absolutely everything about pigs. So if you have extra questions, don't hesitate to ask. Just to get started though, let's go over a few basic definitions when it comes to pigs, because one question that I get asked a lot, what's the difference between a hog and a pig? And really the answer to that question is it depends on which portion of the country you're standing in as to what is the acceptable definition of a hog or a pig. If you are in the Midwest amongst big hog producing farms, they're going to call anything that's bigger than a piglet a hog, especially if that animal is destined to become a meat animal. You know, if you look into the dictionary, it's going to say that a hog is anything greater than 120 pounds. But realistically, just depending on where you're at, people will say hog or pig. It's perfectly acceptable to use them interchangeably. And in fact, in the larger swine operations, they won't say piglet. They will, when they say pig, what they mean is a piglet. Can be a little confusing regionally, but here in Maine, you'll hear the term piglet, and then a term that's not really used much anymore, but we do use it here in Maine, is a shote, and that means a recently weaned piglet. Now, in the big swine operations, pigs are usually weaned at about 3 weeks old. When we raise them in a backyard situation, most pigs are weaned about 6 weeks old. And then you may hear pigs called butcher hogs, and that's animals being raised for meat. You may hear the term feeder pig. That is also a recently weaned pig that you buy to feed out. And then you may hear the term grower or finishing hog, and that's just a little bit older shote that we raise for meat also. In the large-scale swine industry, these terms are way more specific because they are so vertically integrated. They have a room where the pigs farrow out, and then they have a nursery for the piglets, and then they have a growing facility where those animals go from weaning to growing age, and then they're moved to another facility during the last portion of their life when they're giving a growing diet, and that kind of changes the flavor profile of the meat. So we use less expensive grain while they're growing and more expensive stuff towards the end of their life to improve the flavor. So in a large scale situation, grower, feeder, all this stuff has a really specific meaning, and it's got strict cutoff weights. But when you're dealing with backyard folks or local farmers, they're almost interchangeable. The dam is the female parent, sire is your male parent. A gilt is a young female that hasn't had her first litter of pigs yet. And much like cattle, because we would manage these animals differently, you may hear someone say first litter gilt, second litter gilt. And that's just because those younger animals tend to have a little bit different nutritional profile that we have to follow. Sow is a female pig after she's had her first litter. The process of having piglets is called farrowing. When the boar is still an intact male, we call it a boar, but if it has been castrated, we would call that a barrow. And in kind of an old school term that we don't hear used very much anymore, but every so often it pops up, is something called a stag. And that's an older boar that's being sent off to slaughter. One thing you have to keep in mind, once boars hit sexual maturity, especially after they've been allowed to breed a sow, their meat can become tainted with some hormones. And when you cook that meat, it smells like urine. About half the population has receptors in their nose to smell that. So that's called boar taint. And when you're dealing with boar taint, because not everyone can sense boar taint. Some folks will tell you that boar meat's just fine, while other people will say they would never cook a boar. And that's why, because not every person has the smell receptors to catch that. If you have an older boar that has outused his usefulness as a breeding male and you want to send him to slaughter, they used to castrate those animals and let them set for about a month or two. and let a lot of those hormones work out of their system before they slaughtered them. That works to a certain degree, but it's not 100%. Castrating an older pig is quite the production, and that really should only be done by a veterinarian. So we typically want to avoid that at all costs. Same thing, if we are growing pigs to feed when they're babies, we like to castrate them before they're 2 weeks old so that we can do that without anesthesia or antiseptic or anything. This is where we get into the real meat and potatoes of the presentation. And I think this year more than other years, this is a very important distinction that we have to make. When we talk about different types of pigs, there's basically two kinds of pigs out there. We've got our commercial breeds of pigs, and we've got our heritage breeds of pigs. Now, just to keep it simple, commercial pigs are modern pigs that have been raised for lean meat production. So they don't have a lot of back fat on these animals. They grow much quicker than heritage breed animals. This is what you're going to buy when you go to the grocery store and buy pork. On the industry side, almost all pigs are white, and they're a cross between Yorkshire and landrace pigs. And that's because they have fast growth rate, they rebreed quickly, and they have large litter sizes, and they produce good lean meat. Then on the show side, we have a lot more different types of pigs. You've got your Berkshires and your Durocs and your Hamps and everything. And then we've got folks that just raise pigs, a couple pigs in their backyard to sell their local farmers markets or raise for themselves. But then we have the heritage breed pigs, and these are the old world genetics, if you will. So these are what pigs would have been like 70, 80, 100 years ago. Back then, we raised pigs for lard. And so these breeds, when they grow, they put on much more fat than they do meat. Now, the problem with that is in today's modern society, no one really uses lard. So if you intend to sell these animals, that lard goes to waste. Now, our popular breeds that we see most commonly are going to be our Berkshires. These are referred to as high quality table pork because they've got good intermuscular fat and good external fat and nice texture. Black Polands. Now, this is not to be confused with a large black. That's a different type of pig. Black Poland pigs are very durable pigs. They live outside exceptionally well. So they're great if you're going to crossbreed into your outdoor operation. Another thing here to mention is that when pigs are kept outside, they can sunburn. So most folks that raise pigs outside like to have a black or dark skinned pig as opposed to a white pig because white pigs sunburn very badly. Chester Whites. This is a very hardy breed also, but they're known because they can rebreed quickly. So a lot of times these are put into crossbreeding operations so that those pigs will breed back quickly. So you can get as many litters per year as you can. Duroc, that's a big red pig. They're also known for very high quality pork, and they are also well known to be raised outside very well. I really like Duroc pigs. The one thing that you can say negative about like a Duroc or a Berkshire pig is they have small litter sizes. So you're looking at 6 to 8 piglets instead of 10, 12, 14 piglets with something like a landrace or a Yorkshire. Hampshire pigs grow very quickly, and they have very lean meat. You see these in the show ring a lot. So these are very common for show. Landrace pigs, these are the pigs that you see in commercial swine houses, along with the Yorkshires. They don't do too well outside, so I wouldn't recommend getting these as a pasture or a backyard pig. But they have tremendous litter sizes. In fact, they've been bred for such large litter sizes, they actually have extra ribs that increases their length so that they can hold more piglets. So they almost look like limousine pigs compared to other pigs, very long. Spotted pigs, we used to say spotted Poland China pigs because that's where they came from. But anymore, the genetics has been altered so much in those that we just call them spotted pigs now. But don't confuse those with Gloucester Old Spot pigs. That's a different type of pig. That's more of a heritage breed pig. Spotted pigs are great for their mothering ability and their large litter sizes. So when you're raising something outside, good mothering ability is a trait that we really like. Because if you take something like a land-raised pig that's been raised inside their whole life and they use farrowing crates and everything, they're very likely to squash the litters and sit on their babies. And that's very disheartening, and we don't want to see that. So mothering ability is a strong component of picking your pigs for the backyard, especially since we don't use farrowing crates or gestation crates in a backyard setting. And then finally, we have the Yorkshire pigs. These also have large litters, and they're great indoor confinement pigs. Now, if you may ask, what do some of these pigs look like and how I can identify them? Let's start off with a Berkshire. A traditional Berkshire is a black pig that has erect ears, a short snout, and basically 5 points of white. So their nose and face will be white, and their legs will be white also. Now, a black Poland China pig, or just a black Poland pig here, looks an awful lot like a Berkshire, except they have a larger frame size, a larger snout, and their ears are floppy. So you can see the erect ears on the Berkshire and the floppy ears on the black Poland pig. A spotted pig, back in the old days, we would say that spotted pigs don't put on as much muscle as modern pigs do, but that's really not the case anymore. The genetics have improved tremendously on these spotted Poland China pigs, and they will now muscle just as heavily as any other breed of pig. So you can see the very coarse hair on this individual, the semi-erect ears, and he would usually have a more floppy ear, but someone's rubbing his face with his bristle brush and he's real excited, posing for the picture, so his ears are sticking up a little bit. Here's the Chester White, just a good looking pink pig. You'll see these a lot out in the Midwest. There's a good old Duroc pig here. You'll notice that red color. They're pretty hard to miss. I really like the Duroc pigs. They do exceptionally well outside. They have a good temperament. They raise piglets well. The only thing I have negative to say about a Duroc pig is they just have smaller litter sizes. Hampshire pigs are kind of like a belted Galloway cow. They're black, and then they have the white belted stripe through their forearm and front legs. A lot of times when you see these in the show ring, they look like Arnold Schwarzenegger pigs. Big, heavy muscled. I need to get a new picture because my picture does not reflect the amount of muscling that modern show pigs have. And of course, this is the land race we discussed earlier, and look how long this pig is. This pig is like the limousine of pigs. She's got real droopy ears. Doesn't have a lot of body condition. They're usually look like they're on the skinnier side because their genetics are geared towards producing babies and not muscle production. Like I said, almost all the commercial pigs that we raise in large swine houses are crossed between a landrace pig and a Yorkshire pig. So we get the huge litter sizes of the landrace pig, but we also get the larger muscling capability of a Yorkshire pig. So if we'll just switch over here to the Yorkshire real quick. Now you can see the landrace has got the floppy ears and extra long. And then when we go over here to the Yorkshire, you can see that she has the more short coupled, a lot more condition on this old gal, and her ears are erect. You see these a lot with 4-H kids because they're wildly available throughout the United States, and they have large litter sizes and they're fairly uniform, so they're good pigs for 4-H projects.
We have a question or a comment.
There are just a ton of heritage breed pigs, and we can't discuss them all. And in fact, I picked this set of heritage breed pigs to talk about because I have some data to present on these. Scientific studies have all been geared towards large scale production in commercial facilities. So I have tons of production data on commercial pigs and almost no production data on heritage breed pigs, on exactly how much you should feed them, exact nutrient requirements. dressing percentages and all that stuff. There's very little information out there on that. A lot of it's anecdotal and passed from farmer to farmer. I picked these specific breeds to talk about today because I do have some production data on these animals that I can share with. The first in the heritage breed lineup that we will discuss is the American Guinea Hog. American Guinea Hogs are smaller stature animals. They're usually a couple 100 pounds, if not 300 pounds lighter than our commercial pigs, much smaller. They take a little bit longer to grow. They can be popular with homesteaders and small farm flocks because they don't get as big. You know, if you were to raise a Duroc sow or a land-raised sow out to full maturity, they're going to be 600-700 pounds, which is just a huge pig to deal with. So some folks like to grab these American Guinea Hogs because they can be a couple 100 pounds. So it's just less animal to care for over the long run. Now, a Hereford hog is also a smaller hog than, but not quite as small as an American Guinea Hog. They're just a little bit smaller. Here recently, they've become very well known to make gourmet lean sausage. And I don't remember the chefs that made these popular, but at the moment, this is kind of one of the sexy breeds to raise if you're into charcuterie. If that's what you're going after, the Hereford hog might be a good fit for you. The Hereford hogs are neat because they're colored just like a Hereford cow. Nice red color with white appointments. They're very docile. In my experience, they've been easy to keep into fences, and they're just a little bit smaller. So, you know, most hogs will go to market about 275 pounds. A Hereford hog is going to be about 240 pounds. So they're just a little bit smaller. Another popular breed right now for pastured pig operations are large black hogs. These are very popular in Canada because of their large size and hardiness. They do well in the harsh environments of northern climates. That comes at a cost. These pigs get huge quick. They eat a lot. We have very limited genetics to pick from here in the United States. So if you get into raising large black hogs, you'll quickly find that you exhaust your source of new genetics. So you can find some severe inbreeding and line breeding in this breed. That's one thing you got to be careful of. They have small litter sizes and they are terrible on feed efficiency. Mulefoot hogs are pretty neat, and we don't really raise them much anymore because our other breeds of pigs just outproduce them by a whole lot. But the cool story behind a mulefoot hog, they don't have split hooves. They've got more of a solid hoof, like a mule. That's why they're called mulefoot hogs. But back in the early 1900s, when we had this huge swine cholera outbreak that just about killed off all the pigs in the Midwestern United States and parts of the Southern United States, the mulefoot hog was resistant to that cholera. So there was a population of these pigs that remained hardy in Missouri for a long time. So we've kept those. They almost went extinct because other pigs outproduced them. But now they're kind of getting a resurgence among backyard folks and homesteaders, just trying to increase diversity in their breeds. And then we have Gloucester Old Spot pigs. These are a European breed of hog. They have lots of hair. And then you have red wattle hogs. They kind of look a little bit like a Duroc, not as big, but they have wattles like a goat, and those are little skin tags flopping around on it. I don't know why they have wattles. I don't think they serve any purpose at all, but you see wattle hogs running around from time to time. The next breed that we have on here is a Tamworth. Tamworths look an awful lot like a Duroc hog. They're nice red hogs. They do exceptionally well when raised outside. Their meat production is second to none when it comes to traditional cuts or charcuterie. The problem with Tamworth hogs is that they are only a pig you should raise if you are an expert with pigs. Tamworths have a terrible temperament. They run people over. They gouge people with their teeth. They're hard on fences. They're very difficult to keep in a fence. So just keep in mind that while Tamworths have great production characteristics and they do great outside, that can be easily outweighed by just how mean-spirited they can be and just how difficult they can be to keep in a fence. Another cool point about Tamworth pigs are probably the closest thing that we have to what pigs looked like during the Middle Ages in Europe. They're probably the closest thing to what we used to raise as pigs a couple hundred years ago. This next breed I'm going to talk about, it's a Mangalitsa. This is a Hungarian breed of pig. During World War II, when Hitler had different countries in Europe barricaded and people couldn't get food in and out of those locations, the Mangalitsa pig was able to sustain a population. You know, they mostly lived out in the forest, foraged for their own food because there was no food to feed them. All the food went straight to people. So they were eating acorns and all this kind of stuff. Mangalistas have a tremendous amount of back fat. They grow very slowly. They have small litter sizes, and they can get quite mean after they've had a litter of piglets. Now, the reason I talk about Mangalistas so much is there's a rumor out there that you don't have to feed Mangalistas, that they can just live off grass or live off hay. And that is completely inaccurate. If you buy Mangalista hogs and don't feed them, they will die. And as a matter of fact, the reason that we started a new swine program at the University of Maine and started doing these swine lectures is I was getting so many phone calls about people that had pigs that were dying. And after about the third or fourth phone call, I would ask two questions. Do you have a Mangalista pig? And they would say yes. And then the second question I was asked is, are you feeding it? And they would say no. And I would say, that's why your pigs are dying. You need to feed them. And I think most of it comes down to one unscrupulous breeder that was selling those. And I think he's out of the business now, so I don't think we have to worry about that anymore. But Mangalistas are not the second coming of pigs. They are not going to solve the world's problems. They have quite a few issues that you have to work through. One, they don't mature until they're about 18 months old. A commercial pig is going to mature around 5-6 months old. And some of the heritage breed pigs are going to mature between 9 and 12 months. So these pigs are going to take a long time before they're ready to have their first litter. They don't have large litter sizes. The litter survivability from everyone that I've seen so far is pretty small. And they may have a lot of good fat within their muscle, and it may taste very good, but there's not a lot of it. It's mostly fat. If you look at the big hump over the top of this Mangalista hog, that's fat. So if you were to get the pork chop off this animal, the eye of the pork chop is only going to be about 2 inches across, and then there's going to be 6 inches of fat running around the rim of that pork chop. You know, in today's world, we really can't sell lard. You could sell rendered back fat. Most cases, it costs more to render back fat than what the back fat is worth. You know, you've got soap makers and candle makers and crass people like that love rendered back fat. But the problem is once you slaughter the pig, you have to store the back fat. That means you have to freeze it. And then you have to gather it all up, get a big pot boiling real hot over fire, render the back fat down till it renders out nicely. And if you take that about 2 seconds past, when it renders, it'll burn and then it's worthless. So all the time and effort it takes to render back fat, it's really just not worth it to be able to sell it. Now, if you're a crafts person and you're just wanting to do it for funsies, have at it. These are also becoming really popular for charcuterie. And when I say charcuterie, that's just a fancy word for making fancy sausages. So instead of cutting the hog up to make pork chops, ribs, ham, bacon, and stuff like that, the hog is ground up and made into different types of fancy sausages and maybe some Italian style cured meats like prosciutto and all this other fancy stuff. So they're pretty common for that. If you intend to make money raising Mangalista hogs, you'll probably have to charge 3 to 4 times as much as you would for a normal pig just to be able to recoup all the extra inputs and time and effort you have to put into these pigs. And you do have to feed them, just as a reminder. Here's a picture of that Tamworth pig. You can see he's outside living in the snow, just happy as all get out. Here's a nice, pretty Hereford hog. And you can see they're a little bit smaller framed, but they're very well known for lean sausage production. So if you're in the charcuterie market for some dried sausage products, these are highly sought after. Almost all the commercial breeds that I've listed here are good-natured pigs. And if we go over to the heritage side, most all of these are good-natured too, with the exception of the Tamworth and the Mangalista. I've not been around too many mulefoot hogs to let you know about their disposition. Large blacks tend to have a good disposition, but they're just huge, so they're tougher to deal with. And pigs are pretty bullheaded and stubborn. Like an American guinea hog at 200 pounds is a lot to handle when it's being stubborn. A large black at 700 or 800 pounds when it's being stubborn is almost unmanageable. And I'm going to take just a second here, and we're going to switch gears and talk about swine reproduction. And then I'm going to get into the fun stuff, the nutritional side. Just some basic info here. On our commercial breeds of pigs, we like to get those gilts bred when they're about 5 to 6 months old. They should weigh around 300 to 350 pounds. Now, if you're raising a heritage breed animal, those mature slower and take longer to grow. So most of those are going to be closer to 9 to 12 months old when they're ready to breed for the first time. If you breed them too early, you'll get into hip, leg, and back issues. And then they also will have issues farrowing. You know, piglets will get stuck. The gilts won't take good care of the babies once they're born. So you want to make sure that those animals are physically and mature enough to have those. You may ask me, what if I don't have a scale? How do I know if my pig is 300 or 350 pounds? If you have a commercial breed of pig, you can actually take a flank to flank measurement. And here's how you would take that flank to flank measurement. This flank all the way around, or you can do the flank to the spine and then just double that number. And you can see that data correlates very well with weight. And so here's the chart that will correlate the distance to the actual live weight pound of the sow. This does not work on heritage breed animals. I can't help you there. You can purchase like vet scales that weigh 600-700 pounds for about $200 off eBay or Amazon or what have you. They're just a large platform scale. And I trained my piglets to walk up on that scale when they're little. I give them a treat and then they walk up on it. And then when they get older, I can just hold a dog biscuit or a cookie or something up and they just go and walk on the scale and I can get their weights very easily. If you're not doing this for a production, if you're just raising 1 or 2 backyard pigs, you probably don't need a scale or want a scale, but they're very handy to have, especially when it's time to know exactly when they are at their slaughter weight. Pigs are pregnant for 115 days. The old axiom is 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And they come into heat about every 21 days. The average litter size per pigs has been steadily increasing for the last 20 years. It's about 10 to 11 piglets per litter. That's up, from 20 years ago when it was about 8. And then when we look at the average litter sizes here, it's just another way of saying the same thing. You may notice that there was a significant drop in litter sizes in 2013, and that was the porcine epidemic diarrhea outbreak that spread across the world. So that was a severe hit. You'll hear it referred to as PED commonly. That was a big deal in the swine industry. We've now recovered from that, but there's been several other outbreaks of different things since then. The big one right now is African swine flu. You may see that in the news. These are all things to be cautious of and use good biosecurity when you're introducing new animals to your farm. Now, if you're wanting to breed your own pigs, there's 2 ways to do it. One is you need a boar, and you do a live cover where the boar actually breeds the sow or breeds the gilt, that's a good way to do it. But you have to take care of the boar all year round. Boars get big when they smell the sows coming into heat and stuff. They have a really musky smell, and they pee on themselves to increase that smell. And it costs a lot to feed a boar throughout the year. So not everyone likes to keep a boar, and they can be difficult to keep in a fence when they know females are close. So some folks choose to artificially inseminate their pigs. And of all the farm animals, swine are probably the easiest to artificially inseminate. We're going to go over the basics of that artificial insemination next. But the reason why they're so easy to inseminate is because the sows are very receptive to it, but they've also got some really unique anatomy. So the tip of the boar's penis is actually almost corkscrew shaped. So if you want to think of it as a screw or a bolt with left-hand threads, and then the sow's cervix is also threaded. And so when you actually go to artificially inseminate these animals, you can just use a straw that has a left-hand thread corkscrew on it and just thread it into the female cervix and put fresh semen. Now, cattle, we freeze semen. So you've got to know about proper freezing protocols. You got to have liquid nitrogen on hand. It's very difficult. Things like goats and sheep have very low success percentages when it comes to artificial insemination. Horses possess their own challenges to artificial insemination. But pigs are pretty easy. The physical act of doing the AI is super simple. You can teach a kid to do that. Plus, their semen isn't frozen. It's kept fresh, but it can stay fresh for 6 or 7 days. So you can detect the heat cycle in your sow, call the boar stud and have them overnight you semen and breed your sow. And then you don't have to store any semen on site. You don't have to do timed AI like you would in cattle. You're not constantly out there checking heat and everything. So AI in pigs is very simple, and it's an outstanding way to improve your genetics. You know, here in Maine, we don't have a lot of pigs, so our genetic pool is very small. So if you want to raise really high quality pigs, you have to outsource genetics. And so we usually have to go to Pennsylvania or Ohio before we start getting into the real high quality breeders of pigs. And so, you know, if we wanted just to drive down and pick up a pig, that's a 2-3 day adventure, right? Because it's 1,000-1,200 mile trip one way. But we could just call those same people and they can FedEx us some semen. And so for $75 or $100, you can have top quality genetics delivered to your door. The hardest part about artificially inseminating or just breeding in general is heat detection. And what we're looking for on the sow or the gilt is a swollen vulva. If she's a pink pig, it's going to turn reddish and pinkish. If it's a black pig, you can't hardly detect the color difference, but you will see that swollen vulva. You will see a mucosal discharge just before standing heat. So one day her vulva is going to be swollen. The next day you'll see that mucosal discharge. You're going to see the other pigs nuzzling each other and attempting to ride the other sows. And the ears are going to stand up all perky. And then the next day she should be in standing heat. And when I say standing heat, that means when you lean on her back like this young man is doing in this picture, she's just going to hump up her back, stand square, and stand there for you. Her ears go erect, her skin gets real pinkish color, and then you're able to insert the artificial insemination rod. If you have the luxury of having a boar, like in this picture here, you see this fence, there's probably a boar on the other side of this fence, so it really gets her attention. If you've got multiple sows, we used to hop into pens and we just lean on their backs when we saw that they were coming into heat. And as soon as they would stand for us to lean on them like this, that's when we would do artificial insemination. So when you see this behavior, if they are a gilt, you would give them semen 12 hours directly after that. And if they are a sow, 24 hours after that. And if you want to be really, really sure that she takes, you would breed them once a day, every day that she would stand for it. Most of the times you can get one. Sometimes you can get two. I've never done 1 3 times. That's the hardest part, is just detecting estrus or the heat cycle in pigs when we're artificially inseminating them. Gilts don't follow all the rules. They're the hardest of all of them to detect heat in. But sows pretty much follow the rules, and they're no problems. So if you are going to buy pigs for a breeding program, I would recommend buying a bred gilt. That way you don't have to fool with it, or keep a live boar on the premises. Artificially inseminating gilts is probably not the easiest of everything to do, but it can be done. And then it saves you from having to keep a boar around. And we're going to talk about swine nutrition. Swine nutrition means a lot of things to a lot of different folks, and I monitor the Maine Facebook pages and stuff, and see how folks feed pigs around in Maine and other New England places and across the country. And a lot of folks make it way more complicated than it needs to be. But I think if we understand the basic principles of animal and swine nutrition, it's easy to make decisions on what you should feed your pig. So let's start off with just the very basics. There are 6 essential nutrients that all farm animals need, especially pigs. First limiting nutrient is always water. Just like every other farm animal, pigs need access to fresh, clean, cool water 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If we limit how much water they have available, they will eat less. And if they eat less, they will grow slower. They won't grow as well. And it will lead to some stress on the pig. And they will get sick easier because their immune system will be compromised. And they'll get grumpy. And if they don't get enough water, period, they could have a heat stroke, especially in the summer. So always want to have good access to water for pigs. We'll discuss a few watering systems a little bit later on. And then it gets down to the nitty gritty. So the basic components of food. We have protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, and minerals. So let's start off with proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. So think of amino acids as the building blocks of protein. And animals utilize protein to build fat, or to build muscle, bones. Excess protein is stored as both muscle and fat. If we want those pigs to grow up big and strong and healthy, they need to meet their protein requirement. And we can do that by buying feed that is specifically labeled for pigs in specific stages of production. But just take a look at all the important things that proteins do for growing animals and just for animals to live on a day-to-day basis. Proteins make up the basic structural units of most of everything in the body. They drive metabolism. They're the basis of hormones. They create antibodies, and they drive DNA production. So it's very important that we make sure these animals get enough protein. And then we have carbohydrates and lipids. If you talk to an animal nutritionist, they'll throw around terms like energy and protein. And when we say protein, what we're really talking about is crude protein. It's called crude protein because we don't actually measure the amount of protein in a feed source to get crude protein. We actually take a sample of a feed source, we ash it down, we get the amount of nitrogen and multiply the amount of nitrogen times 6.25, and that gives us crude protein. So that's a very crude measurement. So protein varies a little bit. And then we'll say energy. And when we talk about energy, what we're really talking about are various carbohydrates and fats. The most abundant form of energy on the planet is actually cellulose. Cellulose is a structural component of plant cells. One of the reasons that plant cell walls are rigid is they're composed of cellulose and other different types of fibers. But it's only one animal that can digest cellulose on its own, without help from other animals. And that's a termite. A termite actually has a cellulase enzyme that will break down cellulose so that that animal can get energy from cellulose. Every other animal that eats grass and hay and different types of forages breaks down the fiber in those forages through proxy by microorganisms that live in their guts, like bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. Okay, that comes in really important later when we're talking about whether pigs can eat forage and grass and things. Now, if you will remember, excess protein is stored as both muscle and fat. Excess carbohydrates and excess energy is stored as fat, not muscle. So if we get our diet out of whack and we don't give them enough protein, but we try to make up for it with extra energy sources, they won't grow muscle. They'll just start putting on fat. And then, of course, there's fat. Fancy way to say that's lipids. It's real important because fat provides the animal with a source of insulation, body heat in the winter, body protection. Most fat sources in animal feeds come from byproducts of other industries. So most vegetable oils are pressed out from various other things. Like, so when we make soybean meal and stuff and we've got extra, the oil left over, that's a byproduct, sunflower oil, so on and so forth. Those are byproducts. They contain a lot of energy. So we'll put them into feed sources. And then we've also got animal byproducts like tallow that are a good source of fat. We do not feed very much animal byproducts to swine. Actually, almost none at all. And later I'm going to discuss the importance of that. And then we've got minerals. Think of minerals as just really tiny ground up rocks. You know, minerals basically last indefinitely when stored on the shelf. We've got major minerals that are required in higher doses, and then we've got trace minerals which are required in much lower doses. So major minerals, we may say that they're required as a percentage of the diet. Trace mineral requirements are so small, we would say parts per billion, you know, is how much they need to eat. I've highlighted one very important mineral for pigs, and that's iron. Piglets are born iron deficient, and that's just a evolutionary trait. I've heard a couple different theories as to why, but regardless, it's true. So piglets are born iron deficient. They need to get a good source of iron before they are 7 days old. If piglets, the easiest way to do that is with an iron shot. It's cheap, it's easy to do, it doesn't affect any of your like organic or all natural protocols or anything because it's just a mineral. What happens is when piglets are iron deficient, they get sick easier, their bones don't develop as well, they grow slower, they don't eat as much, they just look like poor doers or sickly animals. And a lot of times people will say, oh, my piglets have got pneumonia, or my piglets have scours, or, you know, it's from the wet weather, it's from this, it's from that. And most of the time, though, it's because they were not supplemented iron. A lot of folks will tell you, you know, hey, I raise my piglets out on dirt. They get iron from the dirt, so that I don't need to give them an iron shot. And that's true. They can receive iron from eating dirt. However, when we farrow out pigs, we don't do it in a dirt lot. We do it in the barn on concrete, or on a bed of hay, or on a bed of straw, or on a bed of sawdust, in a board slatted floor or something. Those piglets really don't have free access to the dirt, and they will not produce as well over their lifetime as if they would have had an iron shot. So the moral of the story here, iron shots are cheap, effective, and easy to give. So give those piglets a good iron shot when they're born. About 3 days old is an ideal time to give it to them. You can give it to them at 1 day old, but they need it before they're 7 days old, or they will have a lifetime of disadvantage because they weren't given an iron shot. Now, vitamins, similar to minerals, are a micro component of the feed that they eat. Very important. In nature, animals get vitamins from eating green leafy stuff, digesting organs in the case of carnivores, things like that. We have to actually put vitamins and minerals into pig feed so that we meet all their vitamin and mineral requirements. If you'll remember, I said that minerals are essentially just crushed up rocks and heavy metals, so they will sit on the shelf almost indefinitely and never spoil or go bad. Vitamins, however, do go bad. They break down. They will especially break down if they're exposed to UV light or harsh temperatures. So vitamins start breaking down after they've been stored for about 3 months. And after about 6 months, they're almost completely useless. This is important to know is when you're buying feed in bulk. So, if you go to the hardware store or the feed mill or what have you, a bag of pig food is $16, or you can buy a ton for $200. And you say, well, I'm saving a lot of money if I buy that ton at $200 compared to $16 a bag for the commercial feed. I'm just going to do that. Well, it does you absolutely no good if you can't feed that feed up within that 3-month time period, because after that, the vitamins start leaching out of the feed and the animals cannot utilize that nutrition effectively. So the next question you're going to ask me is, if that's the case, why don't we just buy vitamins and supplement it into the feed? And you can absolutely do that. The problem with that is pure vitamins are very, very expensive. You can go to the feed store and buy a sack of minerals. You can get a 50-pound bag of mineral for cheap. You buy some vitamin E or vitamin A or D or something, just a tiny amount. It's going to cost hundreds of dollars. So the feed mill can buy those vitamins on a large scale and put trace amounts into your feed affordably. But as an individual, it's very, very difficult to supplement vitamins correctly. And pigs need those vitamins to grow healthy. We're going to discuss that a little bit later in the presentation, just how important that is. Now, most folks on this presentation are astute enough to say, hey, this is a cow. Why are we talking about cows in a pig presentation? And it kind of goes back to the comments I had about the Mangalistas and people starving their pigs to death. And, they were saying, well, he's out on pasture. Why can't it do that? This gets back to that fiber argument or that cellulose argument. Ruminant animals evolved to live off forage. And part of the way that they live off forage, the reason that they can live off forage is they have a 4-chambered stomach, which makes them a ruminant. The largest chamber of that stomach is the rumen. Inside that rumen lives bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. And they break down the cellulose, and the animal lives off the byproducts of the bugs that live inside their stomach. When we feed a ruminant animal, we are actually feeding the bugs that live inside their stomach, and the animal lives off the byproducts of the bugs and the dead bugs themselves. So they get protein from dead bacteria. In the case of a cow, the bacteria produce volatile fatty acids, and the cow metabolizes those volatile fatty acids into energy that their body can use to live and grow. And so that's how they can live off forage alone. Other ruminant animals are giraffes, deer, sheep, goats, cows, those kind of animals. And some of you are saying, well, what about animals like rabbits, horses, and elephants? They're not ruminants, but they live off forage diets. And they have a little bit different digestive anatomy. They have very similar digestive anatomy to people on the front side. So they have just a regular stomach and a regular small intestine. But then when we get back here to where the small intestine and the large intestine meat, they have a very large organ called a cecum. And much like a ruminant animal, there lives bacteria, protozoa, and fungi inside the cecum. And those bacteria break down the forage that the rabbit, the horse, or the elephant's eating, and then distributes nutrients to the animal. Now, this is not as an efficient of a system as the ruminant system. Relative to their body weight, these hind gut fermenters that have this large cecum eat more feed than a ruminant animal does. Now let's talk about people. We as people cannot digest fibers because we don't have any enzymes that break them down, and we don't have a cecum. In fact, the place where a cecum used to be is now what we call the appendix. So we don't have much use for our appendix, and it's certainly not large enough to digest forage. So one of the reasons when people go on diets and they eat a lot of lettuce and fibrous materials is because it fills up your belly, but we really can't digest it, so we can't get much nutrients from it, and therefore we lose weight. Now, pigs, on the other hand, have a very similar digestive tract to people, with one notable exception. They have a very small cecum. So I want you to look at the size of this cecum relative to the animal's body compared to a rabbit or horse. Much, much larger there. Now, because of this, pigs can digest some cellulose and some fibers. So pigs can have a portion of their diet in forage, but they can't live off forage. That's not enough of a cecum for them to live off forage alone. I know that was a big, long lecture when I could have just said that up front, but I find that most people really can't appreciate why some animals can live on forage and while others can't until they get a good look at the digestive anatomy of those animals. Just the quick table here is how much water does my pig drink? This is a cool table to have in case you don't have running water at your pig barn and you need to store water and you need to calculate, how long my water should last per pig or how big of a container I should buy for my pig. Nursery pigs are going to drink about 3/4 of a gallon a day. Grower pigs, 2 to 3 gallons a day. Finishing pigs, 3 to 5 gallons a day. Gilts and sows usually drink 3 or 4 gallons a day, and when they're pregnant, that almost doubles. And when they're lactating, it more than doubles, so you can expect them to drink 7, 8 gallons of water a day. Boars are usually around 5 gallons a day, full size. Now, keep in mind that pigs like to play in water, so they need this much water to survive healthily, but they also like to play in water, so they're going to waste quite a bit of water, so you need to make sure to give them in excess of this number. How much is my pig going to eat a day? Smaller pigs, you should feed them about 3 pounds a day. As they get older, we're going to increase that. And then by the time that they're up to slaughter weight, it's going to be about 7 pounds a day. And that means that our growing pig is going to eat about 700 pounds of grain over its life cycle. Now, these numbers are going to vary depending on breeds. So if you have commercial breeds of pigs, these numbers are pretty accurate. If you have heritage breed animals, we feed those differently. Commercial breed animals, they are given free choice feed. That means that they are allowed to eat as much as they want 24 hours a day. And they will reach slaughter weight out on pasture in probably 6 or 7 months if we give them free choice grain. If you did that to heritage breed pigs, they would actually just turn into little butterball turkeys, and they would just be swelled up like a tick, nothing but fat with almost no muscle development. So we have to limit feed heritage breed pigs. That means that once or maybe twice a day, we give them small amounts of feed. You know, my Berkshire gilts and stuff, I feed them about 2 quarts twice a day. As we get to time to breed them, I want to make sure that they're only eating 4 or 5 pounds of feed a day, because I don't want them to get too fat. They get too fat, they have farrowing issues. And I'm only feeding them once a day when they're pregnant. I didn't put this chart up here for y'all to memorize this or to even really understand all the numbers that are going on here. On the left-hand side of this chart are different stages of production for pigs. And then to the right of that, we have the amount of protein that animal needs during that particular stage of production. And then we have the first limiting amino acid, how much they need, and then the second limiting amino acid, third, fourth, fifth, and then phosphorus there on the end. Take a look at a couple of these. And the reason I'm telling you this is we need to make sure that our feed matches the level of production of the animal. If we look at a lactating sow, we see that she has the same crude protein requirement as a starter pig. And so you may think, well, I can just feed the same 19% protein feed to my lactating sow as I do my starting pigs. But what we see is that starting pigs have a 15% greater demand for the amino acid lysine than lactating sows do. So if we were to feed this starter pig a lactating sow diet, they would be deficient in the first limiting amino acid. So always match your feed to the stage of production of the animals. And if you have multiple stages of animals that you're feeding at the same time, you need to make sure to meet the highest demand so that all the animals are getting what they need. And the reason that is so important is this is just the classical nutritional conundrum that we deal with. Imagine a wooden barrel, and the staves of the wooden barrel are the nutrient requirements of the animal. You know, this particular example is dealing with minerals, but the same would be true from vitamins, protein, amino acids, and so on. We cannot reach the animal's genetic potential unless the barrel has a top stave. So if the animal is deficient in iron, that's a short stave, I can only fill that barrel up to the shortest stave. So if we go back to this example, this starter pig would never be able to grow to its full potential unless it gets that full lysine requirement. Same thing with iron. You know, for the rest of its life, unless it hits that iron requirement, will never be able to produce at its capability. And then those animals become immunocompromised and stressed, and they can pick up disease easier and die quicker. Or they just don't get enough nutrition and they basically are starving, and they have to start metabolizing their own organs and body fats and muscles to get the extra nutrients that they need. So very important to meet the nutritional demands of any livestock, and we're just talking about pigs on this one. And that's why. Now, if you have commercial breed pigs, I would recommend that you get a gravity feed feeder. And you know, these things can come in small, galvanized, all the way up through stainless steel. And if you got lots of pigs, they even make wagons that you can pull behind on tractors that hold tons of feed. And people will sometimes tell me, I don't like these gravity-fed feeders because the pigs waste food. When people tell me that, I know right off the bat, they don't clean the feeder. So inside this feeder is a little trap door that regulates how much feed can flow through. And then there's a lip running around the bowl here. And so pigs will stick their face in there and they breathe heavily, and that puts humidity into the air. And so some of the feed will cake up around the edges and around the backside. Or they go get them a big drink of water and spit it into the feeder so they can make pig soup, because pigs like pig soup. And that'll get nasty. and moldy and crusty, and it'll look gross and smell gross around the edges. And pigs don't like that. So they'll go in there and they'll root out the feed until they root enough feed out that it smells and tastes fresh. And that's why they're wasting so much feed at these feeders. 99 out of 100 times, they're dirty. You got to periodically clean these things. And what I like to do is about every 3 or 4 days, I just run my hand up around there and see if they're clean. They need to be cleaned out on a regular basis, especially in humid environments, or if your pigs have access to water close by where they can go spit a bunch of water in there. Other than that, they work great. And if you get stainless steel or galvanized ones, you can pressure wash them and disinfect them between pigs so they're not going to spread any disease. Wooden ones work well, but you cannot disinfect wood. So if you're going from one batch of feeders to the next, you can spread disease that way. Whenever possible, I like to build pig stuff out of metal or plastic so that it can be disinfected. If you just got a small amount of pigs, you probably can't feed enough feed to go buy bulk. You just have to go to the store and buy sack feed. And it's more expensive, but you know, economy of scale wise, you've got to feed a lot of feed to be able to buy it by the ton. If you don't have the ability to balance a ration from bulk feed stuff, you should just go buy bag feed. And I put Purina up here, and this is going to be the same for all reputable feed manufacturers. They are going to say what stage of production it's for. This particular feed is a starter through grower. So as soon as these piglets are weaned, they can live their life on this feed alone. You don't have to buy a whole bunch of different feed. Pigs so if you bounce from one brand of feed to the next, you may notice that sometimes won't eat the new feed, or they'll go a couple days without eating the new feed because they're not used to it and they're scared of it and they don't like it. And that's because while it may meet the 19% crude protein or this or that, it has different ingredients. And, you know, reputable feed mills use the same ingredients every time to make the same feed. Some feed mills will just buy whatever's cheapest that day. So, you know, one day it might be mostly corn, the next day it might be barley. The palatability and the taste is going to be different from batch to batch. And pigs don't like that, and they can quit eating feed. So if you've got a brand that you like, stick with it and don't go back and forth.
We did have a question about the danger of providing higher nutrition quantities than are needed at the different stages of growth. So is it going to hurt to feed a higher protein feed to an animal that doesn't have the requirement for higher protein?
In a sense, no. The things that you got to worry about is the animals getting too fat if you feed them too much. So you would cut down a little bit on the feed, but make sure that they meet all their other requirements. It's a balancing act. If we go back to this chart, you can see that animals that are pregnant and newborn animals have the highest protein requirements. But it's not a lot different than smaller barrows and gilts and stuff. When we really get into the giving too much nutrition, it's usually gilts are the problems, or pregnant sows. If you overfeed those animals, they will have they will have farrowing issues.
I said it was a problem of cost too, because
yeah, and you're gonna
will just go out the other end.
Yeah,
expensive manure.
But you're not gonna like poison them with too much protein.
No,
it's more or less, you know, it just costs too much to feed them all that extra, and they're gonna poop it out, or they get too fat. This is probably one of the biggest issues that we see with like backyard pig people and homesteaders is slopping hogs. The official term for hog slopping is called garbage feeding. Since 1980, it has been illegal to slop hogs for resale or for to sell meat or to sell the hog. And the reason for this is kitchen scraps, especially those tainted with meat, spread trichinosis. So not too long ago, you'll remember that the USDA said you had to cook pork to 165 to be safe. And that was because of trichinosis, worms. And that was a huge problem. And we were actually able to eliminate that problem by having folks not slopping their hogs or feeding garbage. So now if you look at the USDA, they'll tell you you only have to cook pork to what, 140 or 145? I can't remember. And pork tastes a lot better when it's not overcooked. So that was a tremendous hurdle that the industry was able to overcome. Commercial folks do not slop hogs. It's mostly just the small backyard folks that are still doing this. And if you want to do it for yourself, you're not going to sell the meat and you're not going to sell the hogs. It's completely legal. But if you intend to sell either the pig or the pig meat, it is illegal unless you obtain a garbage feeding license. And to obtain a garbage feeding license, you have to have a rendering facility that basically boils the feed for 30 minutes. And someone has to come up from the state and certify that you can boil the feed for 30 minutes. There's only a very few folks in Maine that have a license to feed garbage because the cost of boiling that feed for 30 minutes usually outweighs the cost of feeding garbage. So you would save money by feeding school scraps from the local school or restaurant, but the cost of rendering it to make it safe would be more expensive than just going and buying pig food. One thing I'd like to mention about garbage feeding pigs, if you hung a garbage fed pig carcass next to a grain fed pig carcass, you will notice that on a grain-fed pig carcass, it's got this nice, beautiful, white, solid meat on it, glistening muscles. And then you look at the fat on that garbage-fed pig, it's going to have an almost snot-like texture and appearance. The taste is not as good with garbage-fed pigs compared to grain-fed pigs. I don't recommend slopping hog. Now, there are some things that you can feed pigs that are not considered garbage, and that's, milk waste, vegetable trash, bread, and those kind of things. Those are all legal. They're not considered garbage unless they've been in contact with a surface that was also in contact with meat. So you can't go get buffet line salad left over because that would have been potentially contacted the hot dogs or roast beef or whatever. So that's not good. You can't get cafeteria waste. You can't get grocery store garbage, but you can go to like a vegetable processor and get vegetable trash. That's legal. You can get leftover milk waste. That's legal. Bread, of course, is just fine, legally speaking. Now, the problem with feeding vegetable trash and bread, these are probably the two of the three most common supplements I get asked about to feed pigs. And the reason you can feed them vegetable trash, you can feed them bread, they will like it. It's not going to hurt them. There's nothing toxic or anything about it. But the problem is there's almost no nutrition in vegetable trash. It's mostly water and fiber. And the pigs don't get much out of it. So you can actually dilute the diet. We've got this feed that meets 100% of their nutritional demands. And if we feed them a whole bunch of vegetable trash and grain, they eat less of the grain, and now we have diluted their diet. And now the pigs aren't getting all the nutrition they need, even though they're being fed extra food. Same thing with just plain old white bread. There's very little nutrition in white bread. I've actually balanced diets with white bread, and you can't make waste bakery bread work in a diet. It just doesn't work. There's not enough nutrition in it. Now, that's not the same as like cake or frosting or cupcakes or things. That's got a lot of sugar in it. and that does have a lot more nutrition in it. But again, that's all energy and no protein. So we have to be very careful feeding that kind of stuff, that we balance their diet with the other components to make sure that we meet their entire nutrient demand. My recommendation on feeding vegetables or garden waste or bread, it's great to give your pig a treat in the afternoon. You know, if you feel bad because you only feed them once a day, it's fine. Give it to them in smaller amounts. Don't worry about it, but don't count on it as part of their diet. This is more of a treat than it is an ingredient into their diet.
Someone asked about growing their special vegetables in the garden for pigs. Are you going to talk about potatoes?
No, I wasn't going to, but potatoes have got lots of starches and stuff in them, but not much else. And they're mostly water.
Yeah, plus potatoes have to be cooked for the pig to...
Yeah, and you'd have to cook the potatoes for the pigs, and if they're green, there could be some nitrate toxicity issues with those potatoes. There's a lot better use of potatoes than feeding pigs. And moving on to forages. I guess while we're talking about that, Don, I should mention pumpkins too.
Yeah.
Pumpkins and big zucchinis and stuff. The pigs will like eating them. They're not going to hurt the pig. The problem is, again, they're mostly water, and they dilute the diet. So they're good for treats, but they're not a good substitute for nutrition. Now, some folks will tell you that pumpkins are good dewormers. There's no scientific evidence that shows that pumpkins are effective at controlling internal parasites. But they have a good time smashing the pumpkins and eating them and stuff. So, I mean, there's no reason not to give those kind of things to your pigs as treats or something to do. But realize that they don't have enough nutrition to adequately meet that pig's growing needs. So if you're raising pigs for meat and you give them a lot of vegetable trash or a lot of pumpkins or a lot of potatoes and stuff, it's going to take an extra couple months for those to hit slaughter weight. So you actually end up feeding them more in the long run, and it actually ends up costing you more in the long run in terms of labor and extra feed and water and the whole nine than it was if you just gave them a balanced swine ration. You know, we said earlier that pigs can consume some forage and get good nutrition from it. If you raise your pigs out on pasture, that is a great supplement for vitamins and minerals because they root around in the dirt and they get lots of minerals from that. They eat green leafy material, which is just chock full of vitamins, especially carotenoids, vitamin A's, and some vitamin B's and E's and stuff. And so pasture-raised pigs will taste different than purely raised pigs on grain because they get all this extra vitamins and minerals from the forages. And their fat will take on a little bit more of a yellow color than a white color. And that's simply the carotenoids from the grass coloring that fat. Same thing is true with grass-fed cattle versus grain-fed cattle. They're not full ruminants. They're not full hind gut fermenters. So the pasture needs to have a good legume or broad leafy component to it. Things like alfalfa and clover are outstanding pasture sources for pigs. Pigs can eat hay, but keep in mind all those nice vitamins that are available in fresh pasture are going to leach out of hay over time. So just like in feed, hay that's over 3 months old is going to leach vitamins. And if that hay is in direct sunlight, the UV rays bleach out those vitamins relatively quickly. But they can't live on hay and pasture alone. We have to feed them some grain. You know, there are wild hogs out there that, you know, that they don't rely on people. They're constantly rooting up high protein grubs, roots, and most of the feral hog populations we have in the United States live in heavy agricultural zones so that they can get a good source of protein from people feeding commercial fisheries, orange groves, and different other farming operations. But they're also foraging for food 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just scraping by. You know, a wild pig would take years to reach the same weight as our domestic pigs because they just don't have adequate nutrition to meet their growth demands. Which leads me to another point. You know, some folks think as long as their pigs are alive, they're doing a good job. You know, they say, well, I feed nothing but pumpkins and alfalfa sprouts and bread, and my pigs are doing just fine. And you go and visit those folks, and those pigs are in poor shape. They take forever to grow, and they're just not meeting their nutritional demands. So just because an animal isn't dead doesn't mean that it doesn't need a better source of nutrition. Okay, so, I've got one more thing on here. Haylage and silage. So up here in Maine, very common to see haylage and silage. Can pigs eat haylage and silage? Absolutely they can. Does haylage store better than hay? Absolutely it does. The problem with haylage and silage is a similar problem to horses and sheep. They contain mycotoxins and other dangerous toxins that cattle are actually able to filter out through their ruminant system. So if there are any hint of mycotoxins in haylage or silage, it'll just kill those pigs dead. You know, if they get into a bunch of silage, you might come and just find them all belly up dead. So don't feed haylage and silage to pigs. You know, some people really, really trust their haylage and silage, or they get it tested and they don't think there's any mycotoxins, and they will feed their pigs haylage or silage. But I don't recommend that because mycotoxins will kill them deader than hell. And also, I'm not real sure that haylage and silage is a fermented product, and it would probably taint the taste of the meat some. It's very easy to change the flavor of pork by changing the pig's diet. And you can do that in as little as 2 to 3 weeks. So a lot of things that we feed pigs will give the pork an off flavor. You know, in a commercial setting, the last 30 days the pig is alive, they completely change the diet in commercial settings to give the best tasting pork. One of those grains is barley. So barley is lower energy than corn. So most of the country where corn is readily available, we only feed barley to dilute the diet. So if the corn is just has too much energy and we're wasting it, feeding it to the pigs, we'll add some barley in to lower that. But up here in Maine, where corn is very expensive and not readily available, we have barley available. And can you feed barley to pigs? Absolutely. If you have growing pigs, you just feed them a little bit more barley than you would corn, and they can make up that slight energy difference. Now, most folks would tell you not to finish pigs on barley because it changes the flavor profile of the pork. So a lot of folks that grow their pigs out on barley will change their diet the last month they're around, so they don't have a barley taint to the meat. I find that barley works really good for heritage breed pigs because it's lower energy. And so the heritage breed pigs can eat more of this and not put on that excess back fat that we talked about earlier. And they seem to do very well on barley.
We have folks that are looking to reduce the cost of feed by growing their own, and they want you to comment on corn. Growing corn in Maine, we're at a disadvantage because we don't have as many growing degree days as they do out west. There was also another comment about feeding grass clippings from mowing the lawn, and also a question about soaking grains to supplement the bagged feed or for a day or two.
Okay, so let's start off with growing your own grains. It is completely uneconomical to grow your own grains. The process of harvesting and drying and storing your own grains, it's just not going to be economical unless you have a very large scale operation. So that's probably not a good idea. Grass clippings from your yard are mostly just grass. They're very, very high fiber content. Pigs can't digest that as well as they can legumes like clover and alfalfa. They may like to eat it and munch on it like some hay, but they don't get a lot of nutrition from that. But again, kind of like the vegetables, if it's just as a treat or that for them something to do, it's just fine, but you wouldn't want to rely on that as part of their nutritional demands. There's some truth to that you can get more nutrition from a grain as sprouts because it's more tender and there's less fibrous material, but there's also more water content, so you end up having to feed a lot more of it. It's kind of a wash in the end. We pretty much quit doing that 175 years ago or so because we found better ways to do it.
And this person didn't ask, but I've had people ask about, they call it fodder, that they actually take the grain and they do sprout it and let the little sprout grow up so there's a little green. The sales pitch is you get 4 or 10 times as much feed from your grain, and the thing is that 10 times is water.
Yeah, it's just water, and it does not complement the nutrition profile of the feed at all. There is a such thing, if feed has too much water in it, the pigs get full and they don't eat as much, and the water really dilutes the diet out, so you can actually get a gut fill thing. And so even though they're full, they can't meet their nutritional demands because there's so much water. Usually that happens when the feed becomes more than 30% water. I know a lot of people like to make like mush out of their feed, and there's really just no reason to do that. It makes a mess. You're just adding water. You're not adding any extra volume or nutrition to the feed by doing that.
Back to the clover, someone just has a couple of pigs and they're wondering, well, can they just gather some clover and put it in the feed trough, and would that be a good supplement?
Yes, that would, absolutely. In fact, with a good quality legume, you can actually, the pig can usually get about 85% of its as fed with a high quality legume. So 85% of the wet diet could come from a legume. Now, when we're talking about pasture and grass and that kind of thing, they can only get about 20% of their diet from that feed because the nutrients just aren't available to the pig because it doesn't have enough bacteria to break it down inside the body. But something like a legume, the broadleaf stuff like clover and alfalfa, those are much more easily digestible. We can break those cell walls apart and get to the higher concentrations of protein inside, and the pigs can do well off that diet. Legumes, yes, just regular old grasses, they don't get much out of.
Okay, and we got another question about, so mash is supposed to be fed dry. Someone said the mill told them to make mash into a soup. Some of that may be dustiness.
Yeah, if you're getting your pig food and it's ground up into a powder and it's dry like that, it may be unpalatable to the pigs. And in that case, you can mix it up with water to make it more palatable for the pigs. Now, that's a lot of effort and a lot of hassle and makes a big mess. And if it sits around too long, it'll ferment and get nasty and the pigs won't eat it. Spills out on the ground and it spoils and turns rancid and gets nasty and makes a big mess. Most of the time, I would just recommend switching feeds if you've got the option. But yeah, if it's real powdery and unpalatable to the pigs, you will see that it gets mashed up and soupy. And I know one or two people were asking about brewer's grains. Brewer's grains are the spent grains left over when you brew and ferment beer. So we've got a lot of micro distilleries here in Maine. And so there's a lot of distilleries that just want to give away spent grains because they're going to have to haul it off and throw it away. So they love when farmers and stuff come and pick it up and feed it to their animals because it's less expense on their part. It's not just being discarded and thrown away in the landfill. It's actually pretty high quality feedstuffs. The process of the bacteria and the yeast and everything breaking down and making alcohol, they use up a lot of the energy, but they don't use the proteins. So this is usually a pretty high quality protein source. Now, the problem with brewer's grains is, so you can see this micro distillery's got 1, 2, 3, 4 of these big brewing pots available. So they've got tons of spent grains to give away every single week. And they want you to come and get it a truckload at a time. And it comes out soupy. They try to drain out all the alcohol and beer and stuff, but it's still very wet. So very high moisture content. Normally something that's high moisture content like this would severely dilute the nutritional qualities of the grains. But in this case, we've actually concentrated a lot of protein and other minerals and vitamins and stuff because we've only used part of it for the beer. So this is pretty high quality feed, even though it's wet. The problem is it goes bad quickly. You'll notice in the summertime, after about 2 or 3 days, it'll start to spoil in the hot weather. And once it starts spoiling, the animals don't want to eat it. And then you just have to throw it away. And then in the wintertime, it freezes. You know, in the summertime, if you could keep it in a refrigerator, it would do great. And then in the wintertime, if you could kind of keep it in a moderately heated building to where it didn't get below freezing, it would keep for a long time and you could feed it. Because it would take a long time to feed a truckload of brewer's grain to a handful of pigs. Can't hardly feed it before it goes bad. Storing and transporting and feeding a liquid feed like this is very difficult. So most folks, when they first hear about brewer's grains, they're all excited. They go to the brewery, they pick it up, they love the idea, and then after they fooled with it for a couple of weeks, they say it's not worth the hassle, and then they quit and they never do it again. So on a small scale, it's probably not worth doing. If you've got lots of animals to feed, it's a great source of free feed, especially if you've got enough animals where you can feed up a large quantity in a short period of time. It makes a real good feed. Other than that, the other disadvantage is with microbreweries, it's not the same type of beer every week. So the nutritional profile is going to change from week to week, depending on what grains they use to ferment and brew the beer. So that could be a little bit of a concern when it comes to balancing out the diet. But no, across the country, we use distiller dry grains, which are dried corn spent grains from the ethanol industry. We use leftover mash from whiskey distilleries to feed the animals. All the big beer distilleries and stuff, we use that spent grain to feed wildlife and livestock. So it is a good source of food. It has a logistical issue of transportation, storage, and feeding to keep it.
There's a question, could you dry brewer's grains and use and store it longer?
Yeah, they'll store for a long time if you dry them. The problem with that is it costs more to dry it than it does just to go by feed. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to dry something this wet. Distiller dry grains, those are actually dried because they recycle the water in the big ethanol plants, and they run that product through almost like a drying tunnel, and that just looks like cornmeal when it comes out. And so you see that in almost all large-scale beef cattle diets and feedlots and whatnot. The whiskey distilleries, some of them sell wet distiller grains and some sell dried distiller grains, depending on the environmental impacts they're trying to meet. But no, like I said, it's a good source of feed. It's just tough to deal with.
Just clarification. On feeding, somebody's asking no meat or specifically chicken or eggs?
No meat. Meat spreads trichinosis.
Yeah. But for a backyard person, if they're going to cook,
it's legal.
It's legal, yes.
It's legal if you don't sell it. And that's you can't sell the pig or sell the meat, but it is legal. It's a lower quality product. The meat is a lower quality meat if you do feed meat to pigs, but it can be done.
If you have backyard chickens that are laying eggs that you can't use, or the chickens are old and you don't need them anymore, then feeding them to the pigs?
The bad thing about that, though, is tremendous risk of spreading internal parasites like coccidia and worms and trichinosis doing that. Chickens are just full of different kinds of disease vectors, which would easily transfer over to the swine herd. One thing I didn't cover is on feeding the pigs. If you have commercial pigs while they are in the growing phase, they get free choice feed as much as they want. If you've got heritage breed pigs, you're going to have to limit feed those. I would recommend feeding them once in the morning and once in the evening. I don't have super scientific data on exactly how much to feed those animals. When they're smaller, it's going to be about a half a scoop or 1 to 2 quarts of feed twice a day. And as they get bigger, they're going to get 2 to maybe 3 quarts twice a day. Your sows and your breeding stock, you usually only feed those once a day. And they're only going to get between 4 and 7 pounds a day. Pig housing is pretty easy. It doesn't have to be fancy. We can build pig houses cheaper than almost any livestock structures. They have to be a clean, dry environment with good ventilation. Even in the wintertime, they need good ventilation. That's probably the number one mistake people make with any livestock in the winter, is they close up the building super tight so no air can get in and out. And this a problem for 2 issues. One, the humidity from the pigs breathing and living increase the humidity in the air and basically makes the pigs wet. And they actually are colder because they're wet than if it was well ventilated. And the second is that closed up stuffy environment builds up disease and other noxious chemicals from the urine and the feces and stuff, and smells real bad and everything. You always know that the pig pen is not ventilated well enough and they don't have dry enough bedding when it starts to smell. If you go in there and you say, "Ew, this smells gross," then it needs to be cleaned and ventilated better. When pigs are housed in a clean, dry environment with good ventilation, there's always a little bit of pig smell, but it's not punch you in the face pig smell, so to speak. Pigs can be kept in a variety of fences out on pasture. Electric fence works great for pigs as long as you train the pigs to the electric fence. Here's just an old school hog growing barn, just a little metal shed, and it's made out of metal, so you can go in there and pressure wash it and scrub it with a disinfectant between groups of pigs. It's got hog panels and T-post to make the little paddock. And if you intend to put your pigs out on pasture, you'll probably be using an electric fence. And so what you do is, when the pigs are little or you first get your pigs, you put the pigs in a solid structure like what we have pictured here, and you run an electric fence around the bottom. And that trains the pigs to the electric fence. Once they're trained to that electric fence, then you can put them out on pasture with 2 or 3 strands of electric, or electric fence netting works really well, and they will respect that fence. If you just put them in electric fence without being trained, they'll go up and touch it, and when the fence bites them, they're just as likely to run forward and attack the fence as they are to run away from the fence. And once the pigs get out, it's really tough to catch them and put them back in. So train the pigs to the electric fence first. The electric netting and the white single strand fence is real popular up here in Maine because you can just move it very easily. So once the pigs have rooted up a pasture in one area, you can just move it over to another fresh patch of grass, and so on and so forth. Pigs root, they're going to dig holes and things, so just kind of have to live with that over the lifespan. If pigs have a way to get outside, most pigs will not use the bathroom inside their pig house, so their pig house will stay pretty clean, and it'll be like a pile outside where they all use the bathroom. So that's pretty handy. A couple tips when using an electric fence. Do not electrify the gate. And it's always better if you have a gate that looks different than the electric fence. Because if you train them to an electric fence and you keep an electric fence across your gate, they won't want to cross the plane of where that electric fence was, even if the gate's open. They'll say, "Nope, I'm not going through that. That fence is going to bite me." So don't electrify the gate. That's the best policy there. And you can see there's people here, they've just got hog barns built out of old pallets. This one's stacked round bells with some metal on top. This is a nice hoop building, greenhouse type deal. This is an old school farrowing hutch. It's an A-frame. The wings on this actually lift out and gives them a lot better ventilation. This is their feeder. It's covered so the rain doesn't get in there. But you can see how much they root up the ground. Let's say you're a homesteader and you're wanting to put out a big garden, but you don't have a tractor and a tiller. Put the pigs where you want the garden and let the pigs root up and tear up the soil and remove all the grass. You have a section of woods you're wanting to clear out. Fence off that section of woods and put the pigs in there and let them kind of tear up the trees and destroy all that. You know, use the pig's natural rooting behavior to your advantage. If you don't want pigs to root, you can put rings in their nose. That's what hog rings were originally for, was to stop them from rooting as bad, because when they stuff their nose into the ground, it pinches them. I say embrace the rooting behavior and just live with it and understand that you're going to have to deal with it. In the summertime, pigs don't sweat very much, so they don't get cooling evaporatively like a lot of animals do. Pigs do sweat a little bit, but not very much. The term sweating like a pig doesn't actually refer to the animal pigs. It refers to the process of forging cast iron. So back in the old days, low quality cast iron was called pig iron. And when you pulled it out of the furnace, when you melted it, it would sweat. And that's where the term sweating like a pig comes from. It's not actual pigs. Pigs prefer a clean, dry, cool environment. So if they had an air-conditioned house, they wouldn't go get in the mud. But most people can't provide a air-conditioned house for their pigs. So in the summertime, it's good to give them a wallow, which is just a hole in the ground with water in it. That serves two purposes. One, it keeps the pigs cool. And two, they get covered in mud and it keeps the bugs off of them. It keeps the flies and the ticks and stuff from bothering them as bad. Pigs can get internal parasites like worms. It's really tough to cure worms. Once pigs have worms, it's much better to prevent worms by giving them a dewormer. Generally speaking, you can start deworming piglets at 8 weeks with something like an ivermectin, and then they get boosters every 6 months, and that will prevent them from getting worms. I highly recommend deworming your pigs. If you can't get to your pigs and give them a shot of ivermectin, there are some dewormers that you can dilute in water and give it to them in the water. I don't think they work quite as well as the injectable ivermectin, but they do work. But once again, once you have worms in your pigs, it's really, really tough to get the worms out of the pigs. It's better just to prevent it altogether. That's one of the reasons commercial swine are raised in a controlled environment, is so they don't have to worry about certain diseases and those internal parasites. I can't get to everything in this presentation, but I'll be happy to share the presentation with everyone. I wanted to talk about this before we had to go home today. How much meat can I expect to get from my pigs? If you intend to raise pigs for meat, the first thing you want to do before you even buy pigs is call the slaughterhouses and book a slaughter date. Pigs raised on pasture should reach their slaughter weight, most cases 6 or 7 months old. If you are to call Maple Lane, they're booked through February right now. If you were to call Wyndham Butcher, I think they're booked through 2021. Most butchers are booked about a year in advance for inspected facilities. Custom facilities, you can still get in a lot of times, but call your butcher and make arrangements before you even get the pigs, because you don't want to get stuck feeding pigs through the winter time and having them 150 pounds too heavy. Commercial pigs, right now, industry average is probably about 285 pounds live weight. Of course, here in Maine, no one has a live weight scale, so it's all done on hanging weight. That's also called the hot carcass weight. A modern pig will dress at 74%, so that means 74% of their live weight. So on average pig, we get a 211 pound carcass. Some slaughter facilities skin pigs, some slaughter facilities scald pigs. If they scald pigs, the weight of their skin is included. If they skin pigs, it might not be included. So keep that in mind. 55% of this is going to be lean meat. So we can expect, if you're going to make your pig just sausage, 116 pounds of meat. And these are just traditional American cuts. When I say the loin eye is 8 inches round, when you go to the grocery store and you see the pig loins and they're like 2 foot long these days and 8 inches wide, that's that land race influence on those pigs. That's why that loin is so long, because the back on those pigs is so long. Our heritage breed pigs, I've got 2 numbers here. The left number is the traditional American cut dressing percentage. So that means pork chops, ham, bacon, ribs, so on and so forth. And then on the right, I have the charcuterie cuts. That's the sausage cuts. American guinea hogs do a lot better making sausage than they do just making pork chops. Hereford hogs do pretty good, but they're smaller, so you're just not going to get as much out of those smaller pigs. Large blacks, because they're large, they have larger bones, they have larger organs. There's less meat on those, so they don't dress as well. Same thing with a mule foot hog. They weren't bred for production, so they don't dress as well. Spotted pigs are better than most heritage breeds, but they're still not as good as commercial breeds. Red wattle hogs are some of the most inefficient of all the breeds of pigs that we can raise on the homestead or the backyard. But look at these Tamworth pigs. Tamworth pigs are actually better than commercial hogs. They cut out better in the traditional American cut, and they've got like 20-something%, about 20% higher yield on charcuterie than modern pigs do. The downside is, like I said, those are an expert pig. If you're new to pigs, don't get a Tamworth.
Pigs could get Lyme disease. I thought if they got in contact with ticks, it's a possibility. To have them in contact with ticks, you'd have to be pasturing them in
pigs do get ticks. And in fact, depending on your pasture situations, pigs can become lousy with ticks, covered in ticks, so much so that they can drain their blood out and become anemic. And you can actually use some different insecticides on them to get rid of those, like you would on cattle, like some porons and stuff. You have to read the label to see what the withdrawal period is on that for eating and what species they go to. But yeah, sometimes you do have to put something on the pigs for the ticks.
And we've had some few questions on watering and waterers. Someone's having trouble with pigs kicking over the water. I had suggested nipple waterers, but you have to have capability of using nipple waterers.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I wish I would have covered that in this talk. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit right now. Pigs make a mess. So if you just feed water pigs in like a trough, they're going to waller in it. They're going to knock it over. They're going to go get mouthfuls of food and spit it out into the water and keeping it, and they'll make it nasty, and you got to clean it out more often, or they turn it over, or they lay in it, and then they get their poop and pee in it. And it's a total mess to feed water pigs in a trough situation. The preferred method to water pigs is with a nipple waterer, almost like a baby bottle, except it's made out of stainless steel and it's got a little plunger in it. And you can either hook nipple waterers up to a pressurized water system, or you can drill a hole in the bottom of a big tank or a PVC pipe or something and thread it in and do it in a storage vat. And the pigs will go suck the water out. And that greatly reduces the mess that they make with water and greatly reduces the amount of water that they waste. Now, with that being said, they will go up and play with those nipple waterers, spill out a whole bunch of water. I've seen them do that before. They'll just go hold their tongue on it and let a huge puddle of water collect on the ground so they can play in it. But it's still better than just a big tub of water. When you buy a nipple waterer, they're usually configured for pressurized water. So like if you had it hooked up to a water hose, and they've got a little stainless steel mesh screen in it to catch particulate. If you set up a nipple waterer, like on a 55-gallon barrel or a water cart or something, you want to take that screen out. And you also want to adjust the nipple water so it has maximum flow to allow just the gravity feed water to flow out at the right rate. And when you have nipple waterers, every single day you need to walk in there and put your finger on the water and make sure that it's working and not clogged up and something's not wrong with it.
And what about winter watering?
I got asked this question when I gave a chicken talk last week, and I think the lady got mad at me when I told her that there's only a couple solutions, and water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit and below. The only way to make it not freeze is to keep it above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So you either have to heat the water. You can buy, like if you've got a 55-gallon barrel with a nipple water on it, you can put a trough water inside it, keep it from freezing. You put it in an insulated or heated building where it keeps the temperature up. With a big enough water container, You can put, like, wrap it in that spaceman blanket stuff, insulation, you know, that aluminum foil bubble wrap type stuff, and radiant heat it and help it. Some of those high tunnel type greenhouse buildings, you can kind of build up a greenhouse effect and keep the temperature up in there to keep it from freezing. But, you know, realistically, that's the only thing that works, is you got to make sure the water doesn't get below 32.
So an immersion water or heat tape, something to...
Yeah, and heat tape you got to be careful with on pigs, because they like to chew stuff, so you don't want the heat tape where the pigs can get to it. With chickens, you don't have to worry about that so much, but with pigs, they can chew into that.
And our last question is, giving diatomaceous earth in the feed at all effective in treatment or prevention of parasites?
Not really. There's not much scientific evidence to back that.
It's a calcium source.
That's true. So is ground up limestone. I think diatomaceous earth is mostly ground up limestone with maybe some other stuff added into it.
Yeah. Well, it's ground up diatoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My friend Ashley likes to say it's not ground up powdered unicorn dust. There's no magic properties to diatomaceous earth.
Okay, somebody said that they saw that on the homestead site, the Facebook page, and I had mentioned with the Facebook groups, you never know who is responding to your request for answers. And it may seem to be working for them, but you don't know what else they're doing to make it seem to work. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I feed diatomaceous earth and I've never had a dead pig, you can check your pigs to see if they have parasites, to see what parasites there are, and then you can treat according to what parasites you're having issues with.
But there's a lot of parasites where there's not a good treatment for pigs, so prevention is way better.
Yeah.
Way better.
And the person
because the pig industry has been almost solely based biosecure facilities for decades now. So there's just not commonly available products to treat different types of worms and internal parasites and stuff for pigs. So prevention is way better.
And the person using the diatomaceous earth that's successful may be in one of those protected facilities that the pigs just don't have access to the parasites.
Yeah, you can get lucky and raise pigs outside and not get parasites.
For a little while, and then...
Yeah. I remember we had a sheep farm one time that told us that they were deworming their sheep with garlic, and they didn't have any problem with worms. And we went out and tested the feces, and they had all kinds of worms. So
I want to thank all of you folks who attended and who stayed in here for the last moments. We will send you a follow-up email that has the link to the videos once they're up and running. And just a reminder, you can download the chat if there was anything in the chat that looked interesting for you. You didn't have to hurry to write everything down. And the chat, when you open the chat, it's the 3 little dots to the lower right of the chat window. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, thanks everyone.
Okay.
Have a great day.